I think that's one of the reasons I wanted to go into international law, is because I realized there's not, it's nice to say, you can't tell a state, you can't go and tell Canada, Canada, you're going to do this, because they're a sovereign nation. They're their own person, they have their own power. They don't have to do anything you tell them to do. But by supporting the UN and giving them power, they get power from the people, just like our Constitution says, so does the UN. And if you have countries that get together and say, we support the UN fully, and if the US, I mean, I love this country, but I really wish we would take a firmer stance when it comes to the UN, because the US likes to say, that's great, but we don't like this thing, so we'll just stay on the back burner. And I feel like as one of the strongest countries in the world, if you don't have the US's power, the US's stance and power behind a protocol or a declaration or something, how are you going to get anything done? And that's why I joined in. That's why I want to do international law. I want to be able to get something done. I want there to be a change. And unfortunately for the ICJ, they take two kinds of cases, and only a member state. Their cases like Canada versus the U.S. That's the kind of case they can hear. But to have jurisdiction over them, you have to say, okay, you can have jurisdiction over me. So just because China is suing the U.S. doesn't mean the U.S. has to show up. If the U.S. says, no, I don't want to go, the U.S. doesn't have to go. They can't make them go. And so a lot of people do say, what is international law? It's really just a whole bunch of talk. And I feel like that's something, I know that the UN they didn't really push getting a whole lot of power and acceptance from the people. And in the 80s, it really went down as far as like what they were able to do and the power that they had. And after that, they really learned, we really need to educate the people on what the UN is. If people don't know what the UN is, they won't stand behind it and they won't support us. And then that doesn't give us power. So I really think just educating the country, like you guys are doing, creating your own chapter here. You're going to educate your school on what the UN is. And once you educate your school on what the UN is, you'll get more involvement and the UN will have more support and really make it stronger.
Can I add something to that? I think what you can do as an individual is, we talk a lot about the United Nations Association being the not-for-profit, nonpartisan organization that advocates for a strong U.S. involvement in the UN. Okay, so our members are out there educating the community that you're here at a college or within the Chicago community. We also advocate. So that means that you get together a campaign and you send that to your congressman. And you say, here, when I talk about the College Consortium, if you could say, here, we're 5 universities in Chicago that stand against human trafficking. And we want to see the United States stand firm and sign whatever declaration there is, and honor if they have been brought up on charges. As you said, we don't have to appear, but if the nation says, and all of our groups stand together over time, we get to be a bigger force, more momentum that's out there, and recognize that we are a force to be reckoned with. It's not just one person at Dominican. It's across the college campuses here. It's across the universities. It's across the non-government organization community. We all stand together. So there's letter writing campaigns. Can you be on NPR? If you, as an individual, have an interest in human trafficking, contact them. Show your knowledge. Get out there and do something. So it is down to the individual. That whole one pebble makes a difference in the ocean.
I just want to add that President Obama just recently, a permanent representative, we like to think of it as an ambassador, but it's really a misnomer. And we don't have an ambassador. We have a permanent representative in the United Nations. And before that used to just be an appointed position, but President Obama made that a cabinet seat. So now the permanent representative to the United Nations is a member of his cabinet. And I think that's something that'll stick with further presidents. And I think it really validates the position and validates the UN, showing, look, we think this is so serious, this person is going to be a part of my official team. So I think Obama's definitely taking a step in the right direction.
Any other question?
I was just wondering, earlier in the presentation, there was a point about states signing something saying that basically making sure that in your country no trafficking is allowed, or people who do it are prosecuted. And does that basically say that member states of the United Nations have to have that clause? I mean, have to sign this, or is it, what does that, or who has to basically sign that?
Right. Yeah, that's a good question. So the member states, if you read the whole thing, it says, if you sign on to this, you are agreeing to everything. And any time that a member state signs any declaration in the UN or protocol or, resolution, they have the option to make a footnote saying, we will sign and ratify, but we don't agree with this one clause. However, that protocol doesn't have a whole lot, so that's good. But basically, anyone who signs it has to do it. Now, have all the people who have signed it and ratified it done that? Not yet. But a majority of the member states that did sign on to that protocol have instituted some kind of legislation. Now, the article, I believe it's Article 5, it was vague enough so that it didn't say how you had to do it, because again, member states and sovereigns don't like to be told what to do, and I don't think that's the UN's place, personally. But it was broad enough to say you need to make legislation of some kind. So in the US, federally, you can get 20 years for just trafficking a person, but you get up to life if it's by kidnap or if you sexually abuse them. So there is a little room in between that, but it may be different. It's different among the states as well. So Illinois has a different sex trafficking or human trafficking law than some other state will. And it just depends on the jurisdiction that that person is in. Not every person is subject to federal jurisdiction when it would come to human trafficking within the United States. But internationally, if you went to London and they said everyone, then everyone is subject to, whatever their law is. So, and it's really dependent upon each individual state.
Okay, you actually touched on another question I had about when I saw the clause that in the United States Code, it said the clause about trafficking. Right. That sounded to me, it said if during the trafficking this and this occurs, then the person, and I didn't understand why. So what kind of trafficking is then okay, basically?
Right. Yeah, I think that would be up to the courts to interpret. And, but they did kind of you can't make super specific laws all the time, because then you have only when this happens, this, and then you have one little thing that's different, one little issue in your case that's different, then all of a sudden they're not under that. So you need to make laws that are broad enough, but not too specific, and then leave it up to the courts to decide. And the courts will look at various things to determine whether it be public policy, or look to the UN Charter, or look to the protocol and say, where did you get, look at the legislative history, where did you get your inspiration for this law? And then they'll say, okay, well, it seems to cover everything. And the UN has a really, really nice definition of human trafficking, and it's really specific. And I think if that were to come to a trial, I think probably by now there's precedent to say, okay,